So when I'm on stage, I feel safe and I'm very, very present. I can only be here, locked in with my drummer. You're looking at however many thousands of people, loads of stuff on a daily basis they debate and fight about, but for that 90 minutes or 2 hours or 3 hours, everybody's just in it for music.
My guest today is my friend, the singular Tanya O'Callaghan.
Tanya O'Callaghan on the bass guitar!
A heavy metal bass rocking Irish lass who has toured the world sharing the studio and the stage with icons like Maynard James Keenan, Whitesnake, Dee Snider of Twisted Sister, and most recently, Iron Maiden's Bruce Dickinson. Tanya is also an ardent activist who uses her platform to champion animal rights, environmental sustainability, and human welfare. Tanya is my friend. She's a total badass. I absolutely adore her, and I promise you, you're in for a treat with this one. So without further ado, let's do the thing. Today's episode is brought to you by the awesome organizations that make this show possible. Are you ready to rock?
I think so. It's very early to rock now.
I know it's a little early. Like you probably don't wake up until like noon. Do you? I mean, you don't really live the rock and roll lifestyle. But...
I'm so far from rock and roll. Yeah. It's unbelievable. Like I got up at 4:45 this morning to watch the sunrise and come here. But
how does that work when you're touring and playing and up late and on planes and buses and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, that is a little frustrating that I'm actually not more quote unquote rock and roll because I am up super early, and I don't on show nights. You know, you're getting off stage. It depends. It could be 11, it could be 1 a.m. and then you've got hours of adrenaline to come down from.
Yeah, you can't just go to sleep.
No, it takes a while to like come down from the high of playing. So, and then you're going to bed at could be 2 or 3 a.m. and then you've got lobby call at 6 and you're just in this constant state of got to get to the next city. But it's weird when you're on tour because you just get into that flow and you take what you can get when it comes to sleep. So hence why it's important to stay healthy.
Are you somebody who can just fall asleep whenever, wherever?
Absolutely not.
Yeah. Oh, no.
No, I wish. Sleep has always been a battle for me, actually. It's quite an ongoing struggle that I'm trying to figure out.
So when you're touring and you're up super late and you have all that adrenaline and you don't get to bed until 3 or 4 in the morning, do you still wake up early on autopilot?
Yeah. I don't think I've really ever slept past like 8 in my whole life.
Wow.
Which sucks.
That's gotta wear you out.
Yeah. You hit a wall. But then I try really hard when I'm off the road to be a little bit better, trying to get to bed a bit earlier. So even if I get to bed at like 11 or something, I'm like, oh yeah, I got like 5 or 6 hours tonight.
That's like a luxury.
Yeah.
And do you have like a specific rider so you can get healthy food backstage and all of that? I would love to see your rider.
My rider?
The most non-rock and roll thing ever,
It is the
probably.
furthest thing from rock and roll. I was just laughing.
What's on it?
I have blackberries and blueberries and mixed nuts, and I have a yoga mat, and I have sparkling water in glass bottles because I don't want any plastic backstage. And then with hot food, it's because you're traveling so many different territories and you're not quite sure what you're going to get, the consistent things like rice and broccoli and maybe beans and some mixed veg. So that's pretty much as rock and roll as I get.
That's pretty funny. It
Tea
must be
and a lot of
confusing for the venue, like stage managers, when they're like, okay, like this is what we need to go.
Where's the whiskey?
Yeah,
She's
right.
Irish.
Yeah. How does that work with the bands? Do you have a positive, healthy impact on the musicians that you tour with, or are you kind of at odds with a different type of lifestyle, or is that changing? It feels like rock and sort of, especially with these older bands and these guys, like they can't go on the road and do all this kind of stuff at their age unless they're taking care of themselves.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like, and I've been really lucky that most of the bands I've been in have embraced it. So it's kind of like you get this annoying health sidekick in the band as well as a bass player that's, trying to bring all the plant-based food in. But it's for the most part completely embraced. With Whitesnake, it's really funny because David got super into it. So there's just oat milk everywhere now, and he's all about it.
That's like really fucking with my like mental image of like heavy metal and like what that's all about.
Yeah, I mean,
how old is he now, though?
He's in his 70s, early 70s, yeah. It's a tough industry. The travel is really tough, the performing every night. So you have to, I think a lot of guys, especially guys that have been around a while like that, you realize at a certain point you can't keep going the way we used to go in the 80s and 90s. So,
Sure.
and then when, you know, people eat a bit better and start to feel better on the road, they just continue doing it. But also for me, like food is such a big passion for me, and travel, like the first thing I have is a list of like which cities am I going to, which restaurants I'm going to see. I want to go see the local vegan restaurants, or, you know, go to the steakhouse and order a vegan meal, and I want to bring the band and show them all this, like my love of exploring cities and food, and they really embrace that. So it's been cool, and Bruce is super healthy anyway, so it's not a million miles off. We eat very similar anyway, so the backstage rider is the same. He has a couple of animal products in there, but for the most part it's the same. So they've been,
That's
and
wild.
and Dee's whole family are vegan. Dee Snyder's whole family,
Really?
yeah, except for Dee.
Oh my God. Was his family meaning like his partner and
His
children,
kids,
or his
yeah,
extended
his kids
family?
and his wife. She's mostly like veggie vegan anyway, and yeah, so that it was super easy to, you know, just be another vegan in his.
Yeah, we're talking about Dee
Her
Snyder
cousin.
from Twisted Sister. Like that just is,
know.
you know.
Yeah, but Dee's like, someone's got to eat meat in this family.
Maybe not. Like if you're around him enough, you know, I would imagine your influence probably wears off on some of these guys.
Yeah, doing yoga before rock and roll shows is not exactly the quintessential idea of.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
You mentioned Bruce. You mean you're talking about Bruce Dickinson, who is of course, Iron Maiden fame. That's why you're in town right now. You're about to go on tour with Bruce. It's like a solo show for him, right? It's not an Iron Maiden thing. And for people that don't know, like Bruce Dickinson might be the most interesting man in the world. Like,
a good
tell me a
title.
little bit about this guy.
Yeah, Bruce is fascinating. He's a total polymath. Like, he really is a fascinating person. He's an airline pilot. Like, you know, he flew Maiden on the plane.
That famous, it was a 747,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
It said
he's a
Iron
commercial
Maiden on the
pilot.
side, and he's flying the plane
Yeah,
with
Flight
the band in it.
666. I mean, it's hard enough to travel and go and
Yeah.
play a show. I can't even imagine having to fly your band. He's also like a champion fencer. He's, you know, an avid reader, an entrepreneur. He's a fascinating person, and obviously a legendary singer. And he's just a great guy. He's a great guy to work with. And we did a tour last year doing the music of Deep Purple with the 82-piece symphony orchestra,
Right.
which is where we met and got along like house on fire.
Wow.
He's just good people. And then now he's decided to go and do his first solo tour in, I think, like 18 or 19 years, because he's obviously been busy doing Maiden and life happening between all that. So I think it was interesting for him to see what the feedback would be when he brought out a new album. And the Maiden fans, it's like, you know, the Church of Maiden, they're
Sure, of
so
course.
supportive.
Yeah.
So the entire tour is almost sold out, which is really cool to see for him, because it's scary for any artist to put your own work out. But I can't even imagine when you're from such a big band.
The fan base for Iron Maiden is locked in. Didn't he also have an aerospace company, like a fleet of planes that
Yeah.
he was managing?
Yeah, he
like
does.
He has all
He
these
has this-
businesses.
yeah, he's got a
He's
lot
like an
of-
entrepreneur.
Big time.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
How
guys
old is he
got to
now?
chat. God, Bruce, murder me if I say this wrong. I don't know. I think he's just early 60s, I
He's
guess.
timeless. He's ageless.
Yeah, he's one of those.
Yeah.
It's actually quite hard to guess. I don't know, but he's so childlike. It's great. Him and his wife Leanna is amazing as well, and they've got that very youthful, you know, still happy to travel. He just loves playing,
Yeah.
which is really nice to see, because a lot of artists kind of get burnt out and they get a bit sick of it all. But Bruce wants to be on the road. I mean, we're shoving this tour in between Maiden tours.
But he's not flying the plane.
No.
Does he
no.
still fly?
I think he can privately, but something changes with license. Like, he's to renew the license. I'm not sure how it works
Right.
exactly, but he's not flying us, unfortunately. I'm sure he's happy about that, though.
Been trying to get him on the podcast. He's tough to schedule and pin
Yeah,
down. He's
yeah.
a busy man.
Yeah, we'll
Hopefully
get
at
him.
some point.
Definitely.
Well, let's take it back. You've lived such an incredible life, an interesting life, a dynamic life, and it's a really cool story. So let's go back to the beginning as this young kid growing up in Ireland.
Yeah.
Paint the picture, Tanya.
Small town Ireland. Yeah, I am from that very kind of quintessential rolling green fields, small town, you know, very normal, simple working class family childhood. And I guess I was a little bit of a rebel in ways from when I was young, and it always felt hard for me to fit into that. So from when I was a really young child, I was sort of fighting this system of you're supposed to follow
Where did that
this
come
set
from?
of rules.
What was that about? What were you rebelling against? Was it within the home, or just naturally you had that disposition?
A little bit of both. I think I had this for me, like animals was a big thing early on. So I had this natural innate instinct. I was very, very drawn to animals since I was like, it was my first memory. And I realized very young at 4 what meat was. And that kind of triggered the first acts of rebellion. But also, I think Ireland is amazing. I obviously love Ireland and I'm proud to be Irish and all that. But our history is very kind of institutionalized in the guise of the Catholic Church and all that. There's somewhat of a generational itch about that in my generation to not like bow down to church and state and all that. It's in you somewhere. I don't even know how to fully explain it, but I felt that rebellion. It wasn't necessarily within my own family, but as soon as I was in school and understanding that, you had to follow this set of rules and you could only study these subjects, and I was always really, really curious, and my curiosity was not allowed in an all-girls Catholic convent school.
Right.
So
and for people that are just listening and aren't watching this on video, like, you don't present as somebody who paints between the lines.
Thank you.
Yeah. In a good way, in the best way, right?
Yeah.
So, all right. So as a young person, you developed this sensitivity around animals. Like, where did that come from? What is the origin of that? Did you grow up on a farm or
I grew up
around animals?
sort of beside one. So a lot of like the housing estates in Ireland, your house behind everyone's house is like a field full of cows or sheep. So I grew up in a small kind of housing estate, and behind our house was a house full of cows. And I thought when I was a little girl that the cows were my pets, because all animals, I was constantly bringing home strays and saving insects, and like I was driving my parents crazy over this. And there was a cow that I named Daisy. Well, I'm sure they were all Daisy, but I kind of thought, and I would climb the fence every day and I'd go out and I'd run around in the field and play with the cows. And I just loved animals. And then when I was about 4, we were sitting having dinner one day with the family, and my brother said, "That's Daisy on the table." And I remember it really vividly. It's actually one of my first memories. And there's just like whole spark of synopsis going off in my brain. Like, wait, what? Like, what do you mean that's Daisy? Now, obviously it wasn't actually Daisy. It was just my brother trying to be, an older brother. We were poking fun at each other or whatever. But I couldn't believe it. And so I immediately didn't want to eat me, and it started this whole commotion, and my poor parents were like, "Why did you say that? Like, this is crazy." So I just had this very visceral reaction to it. And I thought, if my friend, the cow, my pet, has to die for that to be on the table, I don't want to be part of that. So I was just declared right then and there that I was a vegetarian, because we didn't have the language for I didn't find out I was a vegan until I was in my teens. Like, we didn't have the labels around it, which I'm not keen on anyway. But yeah, it was definitely triggered big time by animals, and specifically by like that kind of connection I had to this pet cow. And we had pets, and I just couldn't see the difference between my cat or the dog or the cow.
And you were 4 at the time.
I was a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
As my parents would lovingly tell you.
Yeah, I'm imagining like how that went over when you made that decision. And you're young, and parents are worried about the health of their children and want the best for them and all of that. I would imagine there was some challenges or friction around that decision being that young.
That was a journey for my parents that I really appreciate in hindsight, because they were getting told a lot. Like, you see the misinformation now around in 2024, but back then, like, my mum got told by a doctor that I could get rickets.
Rickets is like a vitamin C thing, though.
It's nothing got to do with eating meat or not. And, I get stunted growth, and doctors were giving her this information. So there was a phase that, all I can do is laugh about it now, but like my mum would try to liquidize meat into meals. So she would try to liquidize.
Just sneak it in.
Yeah, because she was just genuinely worried. But I would taste it and spit it out, and it became this whole thing. And then by the time I was about 6, my dad was kind of like, "Look, she's not backing down on this. So she seems fine. So everything, because Ireland's very much meat and potatoes. It's
Yeah.
like, that's it. Spuds and it's meat, a few veggies. So I would just eat the same thing, take the meat away, and they start putting veggie burgers down. But I'm sure it was scary for them, and there was very little information. And you're a small town in Ireland, like we didn't have the nutritional information back then. But I didn't have the language for it when I was a kid. But I was very aware of my own moral compass at that point already. It was a no-brainer. I wasn't just going to eat it because somebody said this or somebody said this. So it was interesting, and I'm sure it was really hard for them to navigate. But then at a certain point, it was like she seems fine.
Maybe some generational trauma from the Great Potato Famine,
I still eat as if the potatoes are running out.
Right.
Famine panic.
And then you start sort of sneaking away to volunteer at this animal rescue place, right? When you were also quite young.
I was 8, yeah. That became my life for 10 years. So from 8 to 18, I volunteered at a shelter just outside my hometown. And it was just so amazing. Like, it was such hard work. But to be involved in animal activism to that like depth so young really sort of in a way trained me up for the world. And it was just this couple that, started this shelter nonprofit outside in my hometown, and it was a lot of dogs, cats, horses, whatever animals needed rescuing. But because it was totally volunteer based and I had little to no funding, it was all hands on deck with volunteers. So we did a lot of heavy, there was undercover stuff, there was real bad rescue, there was animal hoarding, and I was dealing with this in my early teens, and it was quite a lot. So a lot of my activism in that sense, I sort of got out of my system young when you start to change lanes on how you approach advocacy and activism later on. But I was deep in it for 10 years. Like, it was
like the undercover investigation, boots on the ground, ardent revolutionary energy of the whole thing.
Yeah, like banned from fur shops in Dublin and, throwing fake blood everywhere. And
I can just see it.
All the fun stuff. All the fun stuff.
Oh my God.
But you had to, there was very few animal resources in Ireland like that for shelters. So a lot of it was just downed animals on farms or hoarding and poverty issues with farming, with farmers having to give up their animals, and then, neglect, abuse, all this stuff. We were going through court cases with them, and, just hands-on cleaning, all the glamorous stuff of cleaning up shit for 40 dogs every day.
But you start this at 8. Like, at 8 years old, how did you even find out this place existed, or how did you, and if you're like kind of sneaking off that young, like the people that work there, they're like, there's an 8-year-old who showed up here.
Well,
like,
yeah, no, they became my second family real quick, but it was a school trip that they brought us to a shelter for a day. And we spent the day there. Like, the teachers brought us when I was in primary school, which I don't know what the equivalent is here, but I was 8.
Elementary school.
Elementary, yeah. So they brought us on like a day trip, a field trip to see the shelter. And I just didn't want to leave. So I kept going back so you could volunteer and, and then I would spend my weekends there. They would drop me out when I was I started going with the school first. And then you can volunteer your time, obviously, for all sorts of things like selling tickets in school to fundraise and all that stuff. And then it just became where I went every spare hour. And eventually my parents were just like all in on it, because at least it's keeping me out of trouble. It's
right.
So, I spent every weekend there. And then because the school I went to was relatively close, by the time I got to secondary school in my early teens, I would just what we call mitch off school. So you like bounce out for a few hours.
Right.
And I wasn't doing anything actually rebellious or cool. I was just going to the animal shelter to help out. Again, very
ditching
old rock
school
and
to
roll.
volunteer.
Yeah. Hardcore rebel,
The activism is really the central primary thing for you. It's almost as if the music is something that gives you a platform and some visibility to, be this activist and talk about the things that you care about most. Is that fair? Is that true?
It's 100% true, yeah. Because I never would have guessed that I would even end up in music. There was no sign of it really, other than I liked music and my dad played it in the background, but there's no one in my family that's a musician. But I was going to be a vet or marine biologist, like that's where I was headed. And then I picked up a bass when I was 18 and I did a total 180. It was early on that I also saw that thing of, oh, this is interesting. If you have a platform or if you're out there, you have a different avenue or platform that you can speak about your passions on. And because for me, music was never something that I wanted to get into for the glory of it or for the ego of it or whatever. It was like, oh, okay, you can have a platform and kind of use it, even if it's just like playing around in my local bands. I could put like fundraiser nights on and use the bands to do fundraising. So it was always the roots of activism, and then I just did this 180 and ended up being a bass player.
Yeah, it's a wild story. I mean, not just a bass player. I mean, you're playing with like legends all over the world. It's a crazy thing, and you've only been here like how long? 8 years, 9 years, or something like that.
Yeah, I've been in.
It's a pretty fast ascent.
I like to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I guess. But walk me through that moment where you picked up the bass. Like, why the bass? How did music enter your life? Like, what is that origin story all about?
Well, I picked up a bass because I dropped out of school.
Yeah.
Because I was really close to our finals, which is our leaving cert, and my poor parents, when I think back at this story, I was really good at school. I was a straight A student, but I was just always frustrated with this kind of archaic system in especially in this like obviously Catholic Irish school. I just never felt, especially when I was into my late teens like that, I never felt that it was pushing me or it was really bringing me to where I want. I just had this kind of innate instinct that like, this is really not working. So I left right before, like 6 months before finals, and everyone's like, just stay. You need this piece of paper. Like in Ireland, that's the whole thing. It's like, you have to get your leaving certificate. Then your life will be good. And I was like, it can't be that. Like I feel viscerally ill thinking about staying, and what will happen is I'll just follow my friends in this format. I'll just go wherever they go if I don't follow what's sort of inside. So when I left, I had to do something. So there was a local course you could do, and you could pick, it was like catering, computers or music. So I picked music because I'd had like 2 drum lessons, and I thought, oh fuck it, I'll be a musician. And I went in as a drummer actually. And they didn't have a drum kit, and I didn't have a drum kit. So I had 2 lessons with a local band, and they had an electronic drum kit. And at the time, this is way before like we brought out these amazing digital kits, but I didn't like it. So I was walking by one of the rooms and I saw a local bass player from my hometown playing, Niall Masterson, and he was playing all this really beautiful melodic stuff. And I had never seen bass in that context. I'd only, it's like rock and roll and it's punk or whatever you'd heard. And I was just mesmerized. So I asked if I could switch. So I switched to bass. So I became a bass player instead. But there was no bass teacher. There was only a guitar teacher. So I was kind of left to my own devices. And I just went on this obsessive journey of bass. And I joined my first band, which was my cousin's band, like 6 or 7 weeks after picking up a bass. And I was absolutely terrible. But I thought, well, fuck it, if I get out and play with them, maybe this will like dust the cobwebs off something.
And self-taught.
Yeah, 100% self-taught all year.
There's something really interesting about you, like to be that young, 4 years old, and realize like, hey, meat's not for me. And then to have this conviction around activism such that you're like ditching school and, for the purpose of volunteering. And then that self-awareness that school wasn't moving you in the direction of your intuition. There's like a strength of character there, like a self-knowledge, like you knowing yourself at a very early age and what was in your interest or where your attention should be directed, that I think is unusual for such a young person. It's unusual for probably most people to like have that sense of, it's almost like past life shit, right? Like you came into the world like, this is who I am. This is not right for me. I'm going to move. And to be able to like, against all the pressure of like the Catholic Church, the school system, concerned parents, et cetera, to like make those decisions at such a young age is super interesting.
You say the past life stuff and then people are like, oh, it's a bit woo woo. I don't know. Like I'm not a religious person. I guess I'm some iteration of spiritual. But maybe, I had this conversation with Melanie Joy before, actually, Melanie, where it's like, do some people channel something from a past life that like you arrive and because it just seems normal to me because it makes sense, right? It's like as soon as I discover this, it's like, well, I don't want to eat them because I like animals. I don't want to stay here because it's wasting my time. I know my time is better spent over here. but maybe that's not obvious to most, or the pressure is too hard. But to be able to live a congruent life and to know that, you know, you're in alignment with your morals is something that was very obvious, like, and natural from a young age. So I don't think that it's unique or different, but I think that it is also probably why there's so much frustration in the world and why people are so divided in that, because we are often out of line and we're not living in congruency what we actually feel inside. And, you know, we obviously do that a lot when it comes to morally justifying or morally compartmentalizing things just because it's convenient.
Yeah, we compartmentalize and we deny because we have to, you know, consume and leave a footprint on the planet, and we have to find ways to kind of justify our actions and our behavior so that we can sleep at night. Yeah. Given the fact that I think all human beings are innately compassionate and don't want to do harm to others or to the planet, it becomes a tricky thing. But for you as a young person, you know, in this, like, I'm just imagining you in high school, and you're cutting a very different path for yourself, but peer pressure and, you know, the kind of, you know, sense that a young person has to want to belong and be approved of, like, what kind of, like, what was the, like, where did you fit in at that time in your life? Like, were you accepted? Were you like a pariah or a renegade, or, you know, I mean, it's all very punk rock, but
it is a little punk rock, I guess, when I look back. I don't think I ever had that strong of a desire to fit in. Like, I was okay with being, I always feel like I just had blinkers on. Like, I've always known somewhere inside, like, why I'm going this way or that way. I had like great, you know, friends. I was also bullied over certain stuff, but I also had great friends. It's a mix of it all, because like I had a lot of fun in school with my girlfriends, but I also was very frustrated at like the tribalism within like the cliques. So I floated between a lot of groups. And one of my biggest issues in secondary school, like 2 or 3 of my friends were from, because I think it was a performative thing at that point by that generation, that these schools have like one Muslim girl and one girl from the Balkans and one girl from, you know, wherever, to try and look a little bit like diverse. But everyone was kept separate. Like, they weren't, my friends that were Muslim or Hindu weren't allowed to come to religious studies. And I would get into these debates with my teachers and the priests, like, why not? I want to learn about their religion. I want to learn about their cultures. Why can't they learn about mine? And so I did a lot of floating between the different groups, and I was never necessarily bothered by it. But when it came to like teenage, like mid-teens and party time, I did get a little bit of the uncool pushback, because it was just never really my jam. I would kind of party, but like, not really.
Not like like, what is your, like, have you ever been a partier, like traveling the world and being with these bands and all that? None of that.
No. I'm like, I can.
Not even like a phase.
Like, I can. That's the thing. Like, I've never been a heavy drinker. Drugs were never my jam. I don't like the losing control part. Maybe I'm just a control freak. I don't like that sense of, so it was never my vibe. And I had so many friends that went down that rabbit hole big time, that I was kind of watching on, that doesn't really look like fun to me. And I ended up just being, as a, you know, band mom, or like, oh, they're there. But not really. Like, I've definitely partied at times, but, you know, by midnight I'm probably drinking a cup of tea.
Never. Yeah, it hasn't been a thing for you. Welcome to my sleep sanctuary. Come on in. So the defining characteristic of this space, beyond the fact that it is a tent and I do sleep outside, is my pride and joy, which is the 8 sleep system. You can see this unit here. There is a pad that goes on my mattress that allows me to temperature control my sleep environment. Over time, the 8 sleep system learns what is optimal in terms of ensuring the best night of sleep, and makes suggestions about temperature tweaks to give you a better night's rest. And since I've had the 8 sleep system, my sleep quality has been enhanced by a tremendous factor, and it's improved all aspects of my lived experience. So here's what you're going to do. To get $200 off the Pod 3 cover, visit eatsleep.com/richroll or simply hit the link in the description below. All right, so pick up the bass. You're like, this is my thing. You become obsessed with it. You're in your first band. What happens from there?
I joined my first band in my hometown, and we were like super heavy metal, upside down crosses behind the drummer. It was super fun. And started gigging almost immediately within the first few months. So I'm playing around, playing locally and playing the small town venues, and we're loading in as this heavy metal band. It was so fun. And then after that, I joined a couple of like corporate wedding bands. So that's where you kind of cut your teeth having to...
Yeah, you got to make some money.
You're like, oh shit, I got to make money off this. Yeah,
because it's you got to be able to play the hits and then go do your own stuff on the weekend and not have to worry about making money doing that.
Exactly. So I did a lot of bands in Ireland over this. So within the first few years of me actually picking it up, and I did this music course, which although there was no bass teacher, there was a guitar teacher that was great, and he helped to guide me through like at least practicing some, consistent workouts or whatever for your technicality, and he would challenge, he'd make me be in these different bands. And then for the sake of the experience of doing an audition, he sent me to do an audition to a jazz college in Dublin. And I wasn't trying to get into the college. I was just going to have an experience. It was part of our, we had to do a report back. We did an audition and this is how it went. But I did an audition, and then the college accepted me, and it became this really funny thing because you're not supposed to get into college without the leaving certificate that I
You did anyway. You go back to the high school and say, look at this.
It was pretty funny. I was like, I wasn't planning on getting in. So I went to that college for a year. And I had a good time. That's when I met, because I'm totally self-taught. So I'm going into this jazz college of these phenomenal musicians coming in from around the world that have jazz and classical backgrounds. And I'm just like this chick from a small town Ireland that's playing in a rock band. So it made me dive in to play with some pretty incredible players from all types of styles of music. But after a year, the college was amazing and the people were lovely, but they were really trying to get me, like, let's get you to stay here for 4 years and do a jazz degree. And I was like, but I really like gigging. Like, I like being out playing. I'd already realized that. And I was starting at that time to get TV house band gigs. So like Ireland's equivalent to the Saturday Night Show, stuff like that, the Late Late Show, and you're playing in the bands. And then off the back of that, you're getting these little gigs. And I was starting to get like a little sort of session. I didn't really know what it was yet, like a session musician. And the college was pushing me to stay, but in order to really like follow the criteria of that college and get this jazz master's degree, you're practicing 9, 10, 12 hours a day, and they didn't really encourage me gigging. So I left.
Yeah. Well, that's less surprising because it wasn't your path to become a jazz musician. That wasn't what your interest was. And once you developed the technique and understood like the training and had enough to take away from you, like getting a piece of paper saying you graduated doesn't really mean anything in the context of the career you're trying to build.
Exactly. So again, it was just one of those pivots where it's like, okay, that was a great year. I met some great people that pushed me musically, and now I'm going to follow this trajectory. So at that stage, I was in about 6 or 7 bands at a time.
And are you living in Dublin at this point?
Yeah,
now?
I'd gotten up to Dublin at this stage. For the first year, I was going up and down the train from my hometown.
How far away is your hometown?
It's only an hour. It's an hour and a bit. But when it was funny, because then when I moved to Dublin, and like the only place that we could afford to be was way outside the city. So it was actually further than where I was coming from my hometown. So I was getting up 5 and 6 o'clock in the morning, base on back, 2 different trains up to the city, and then a big walk up a hill in to go to this jazz college. But it was a great year, it was a great experience. But I just knew I wanted to play live. I was like, okay, this is my thing.
So 6 or 7 bands, you're just bopping around with all these bands. What was the kind of big break or inflection point? Like, when did things start to kick into a different gear?
So I'd done a couple years really gigging like the Irish scene, and I did I did a gig with Sharon Core from the Cores, and that brought me abroad, and I was starting to see that, okay, like this can be a career. But at the same time, Ireland is small, and which means it's a small scene, that I was seeing that's it. Like, you sort of rotate in this circle of gigs, and then that's all the gigs. So I need to go out. So I'd start thinking about trying to come to America or London. And I had one band that were coming back and forth doing like UK shows. And then I met Maynard Keenan from Tool. I was at a Tool show. I was over in Glasgow with one of my bands. And he, long story short, invited me to record in Arizona. And I was a massive Tool fan. But one of the things I've never been someone who gets starstruck over anybody, usually just like a philosopher or a chef or something. Again, very un-rock and roll. But Maynard invited me to Arizona when I was like 21.
All right, hold on a second. So I need to unpack that a little bit more because I'm trying to understand how just meeting him backstage translated into him saying, come to Arizona and record on this album. And not for nothing, like Maynard is also a polymath who does many different things. He's got a winery. He's got this crazy situation out in Arizona where all kinds of stuff is happening.
So I think it was because so some of the crew I was working with in Glasgow were working the same show. So that's how we ended up all chatting backstage. And at that time I was in this mad phase of conical rhythms, Indian music in metal, and Danny Carey from Tool does a lot of this really eclectic drumming over metal. So we were just having a very musical conversation that I think it was like me and Danny and Maynard chatting and one of the roadies I knew, and we're talking about music like in depth, like just nerding out. Whereas all the other people who, especially the girls that had come backstage, it was very like fangirl situation going on. So we're having this great conversation. And at the time he already had Pussifer, but he was sort of starting to think about doing another record. So I think he just maybe saw some sort of passion in me about it. And he said, would you like to play on a track? And I'm thinking...
Yeah. I mean, yeah. You're like gigging around in all these different bands trying to make ends meet.
Exactly.
This guy's like iconic. And
exactly.
He's like, come to Arizona and play on my record.
Yeah. So I flew home the next morning and my parents got this like very...
How old are you at this time? How long ago was this?
I was 2021. And my poor parents, again, I like burst in the door. I'm like, I'm going to America. Like, what? I'm going to America to play with. And they're like, the guy from that band, she listens to Tool. I'm like,
right.
Yeah.
Which is kind of like scary. Like
Tool,
bit. It's like a very, for a parent also, you're like the Tool guy.
Yeah, I know, yeah. So I had exchanged a few emails then back and forth with Maynard to figure out when they were doing it. And I sold... I think I had like one bass I sold and a few €100 that I'd saved, and I bought a ticket to Arizona. And because it wasn't a gig in the sense that like all these musicians were being hired. It's like, hey, if you're around, come. So it was a decision that I was going, okay, I should go and do this. This seems like this could be a catalyst for something else. So I saved up my little few hundreds, and I bought a flight to Arizona. Came out and recorded for about 2 weeks.
Was that up in Jerome?
Yeah. So that was my first. It's so
a trippy place.
It's so beautiful and eerie and all the things at once. I really loved it there. But so that was my first kind of dive into the US music scene. But Maynard taking a risk on me as a young player is something that really, I'm forever grateful for, because we just recorded, we did some demos, he released some of the stuff I was on, but it wasn't that I was destined to be in the band with him. That was like a fun recording thing.
Right, you were session music.
Yeah, and he had a few friends come in, and it was about jamming around. And when I look back even at my gear, I always laugh at this. Like, I didn't have good gear. I had this beat up shitty old bass and these terrible pedals, but the experience of going in was so much learning, because the guys that were also working with him, like, these are masters of their craft, and we just had a blast. Like, we recorded it all in his garage, and that left me very much like, whoa, if I can record and play with that level of artist, I think I need to go to the US, because I've obviously done what I can in Ireland.
I mean, a huge confidence booster. But also, being in Jerome isn't like you're in the mix of some kind of community upon which you're going to build a career, right? So how do you take that experience and channel that into this decision to move to? I mean, did you know other people in the music business when you moved out?
No, I didn't know anybody. And actually, it was funny because Maynard told me, don't move to LA.
Yeah. That sounds surprising.
Yeah, because he had already done the whole, like, a lot of artists do a chapter here, and they're like,
yeah, You
fuck
build your
LA.
career and then you
Then
leave.
you bounce,
Yeah.
basically. But it took a good few years because it's also not easy to just come here. I can't just come here. There's a whole visa process to work and all that. So I went back to Ireland and, I just kept gigging and I was gigging around and I was in up to 9 bands at a time at that stage. I was doing 3 or 4 corporate bands. I had a duo, I had a trio, I was doing the TV stuff. And I was also trying to still do my activism stuff. And I think I was just, really cutting my teeth for, I got to get out to America at some stage because I couldn't get it out of my mind that if I can play with Maynard over there, surely this is something is happening I need to go to. But I tried London first because I thought, well, I'll pop over to London. It's right there. And the weather was too like Ireland. So
Yeah. LA was calling.
LA was calling and sunshine really helped. So then I started this whole long process of how do I go to LA and stay in LA? Because it's really, you can only get a ESTA visitor visa at first, so I can be here for 90 days. But I had no idea how expensive it was in LA comparatively to small town Ireland or even living in Dublin at that time. So I would come over and then within 2 weeks be totally broke and have to go home with my tail between my legs.
It's not unusual. I mean, this is a really hard place to move to.
Yeah.
If you don't know people, it can be unbelievably lonely here.
Yeah.
It's so spread out. Everyone's in their car. It's very difficult to make plans with people. People are not so receptive to meeting new people. Like if you're in New York City or London, or you're bumping into people on the street all the time, it's a much more social. There's more social grease, I think. And here you have to really work at it. And if you don't know anybody, it becomes like a very impenetrable kind of lonely place.
It's very lonely. And I was really lonely at the beginning. And I was terrified, to be honest, because I didn't know, for me, LA was just Hollywood. You're like, so you go to Hollywood and that's what you do.
Right.
And then I arrived.
You get off the bus. I mean, it's literally like the script, right? You pull up in the bus and you get out and you have your base
on my back.
And you're at like Hollywood in Vine. And you don't realize that Hollywood is an idea more than it is a place.
Completely.
And you're like, this is it?
And it's awful. It's awful. And it's that exact scene.
Yeah.
And I even, it's as bad as I stayed in the Hollywood hostel. Because I thought, well, that's where you stay. And I didn't know anybody. So, and it's all I could afford. And there was the first time there was like an ASCAP convention on. So I figured, well, in like anything in life, if you are trying to achieve something, you should try and surround yourself with people who are already doing that thing so that you can kind of try to absorb it. So I figured if I go to a few music conventions. So ASCAP was happening on Hollywood and Vine. I can't remember what that hotel is. So I checked in because I didn't have a car. I'd fuck all money. I'm like, I'll stay here. I was terrified because every night I was just like in the hostel with my bass in the bed thinking, this is
You're
it.
going to get robbed.
This is how it's going to end. But every day of the convention that I would go, I would, start these conversations and I was on my own. And so in hindsight, that was kind of a good thing because as scary as it was, it forced me to talk to people. I had to talk to people because I'm like looking for a gig. I'm looking for information on where the gigs are happening. I didn't know anything and I didn't know one single person. So it forced me, and I just kept meeting all these really interesting characters and I couldn't believe it. It's like this guy was in Prince's band and this guy plays for Paul McCartney. And so I started to understand that, oh, okay, these are the session players.
The session musician.
Yeah, and I didn't even
ecosystem.
know that that's what I wanted to be because we didn't really have the same language around it in the Irish music scene. But it's also, like you said, like it's so lonely, and I could sense immediately that it's kind of, can be a city of sycophants as well. It's like
Sure.
1 minute,
Yeah.
everybody's talking to each other, but only if they can get something. But you slowly start, and I met a lot of, questionable characters, and it was, thankfully I had sort of a good head in my shoulders for the most part. But there was a lot of, it could have been worse or it could have been dodgy. But then you start to meet really good people and stuff starts to slowly catalyze.
Yeah, to navigate the sycophants and to realize who's transactional and who isn't and who's a bullshitter. I mean, so much bullshit, And then you realize like, oh, the people that are actually successful at this, they're actually not at these things talking to people because they're working and doing the thing and being professionals. But when you're new, you just want to meet anyone you can. But I think you're a very good people person. And you learn, as I'm sure you have, like, yes, you have a talent. You have to be good at what you do. You have to excel at the skill. But you're in this really insecure economy because there's no job security. You're just bouncing around from, if you're a session player or you're in a band or whatever, or you're working production in film or television, you go job to job to job. And the people that are successful are the ones that are good. They show up on time, all that kind of, they're professional, but also like people like them. They want to work with, they're like, oh, we have another thing. Like, let's get so-and-so. And you seem like somebody who understands that.
I guess.
Yeah.
I guess so. Yeah. And it's like, because when I was new and I was first there, you just have to go around and talk to everybody, right? But then exactly like you said, the people that are really the top cats in this field, you're not going to see them at everything.
Right. They're not on the Sunset Strip, like going to all these they're doing their thing.
Yeah. And at first you have that FOMO in a way, and you're like, oh, I have to be at every party and I have to be everywhere, which is important at the beginning when you're networking, which to an Irish person is just talking, you know. Everyone says, you got to network. I'm always laughing at that word because it seems so forced. So do I.
Well, because it implies the transactional nature of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I didn't like the language around that a whole lot, but you know, it was important to sort of dive in and go to all these jam nights and then start to see who's really working in this industry and who's really doing what and who are the go-getters and who are just the good people, who's like good people. Because I met some really shitty people at the beginning and there was a lot of like trying to be taken advantage of, and you start to filter out real quick. Okay, I don't want to give any energy over here and these people are good. And then, you know, as you show up enough times, eventually they invite you up on stage to play. It's like, she's not going away. It's like, let her up.
So what was the big break in LA? What was the first?
So LA, I started playing. There was a couple of jam nights that happened out here. I'd done some studio work with I had a band in Ireland that came back and forth twice, and we did an album up in Laurel Canyon with a pretty well-known producer, Warren Horde. And that was interesting because I was like, okay, that's the studio side of it. But again, I couldn't work here, so I was going back and forth. And so there's like a little studio thing on my CV for LA. And of course I had Maynard on my CV as far as my musical CV.
That's getting you in the door.
Yeah, people are interested when you have some sort of a resume, because all the other work I'd done didn't translate over here. They're big bands in Ireland or Europe, but nobody knows who they are here.
Except one experience. River dance.
Oh,
You did.
the liver dance.
So you were in the River Dance band for like 18 months or something like that?
Yeah, I toured.
That's iconic.
It's so funny how that translates everywhere. Yeah, I did about 18 months total around the world. And like we played in China and only Olympic stadiums, and it's bigger than, it seems like it's bigger than YouTube. It's so bizarre though when you're in, because it's just not just a theater show, but you know what I mean? For us, it's just part of the culture. And yeah, we go to these places and it's fans coming out for every dancer, every musician. The river dance was, that translates to some people are more confused, because when I say I work with Maynard Keenan and I do the river dance.
Right. They're like, how do I understand this?
They're just like, well, I guess you're diverse. There's a bit of that. But I think, because, you know, obviously in these jam scenes and what they're asking, like, oh, who have you played with? What have you done? So I did have a little bit of that. And then what was interesting when I first started doing that, the sort of top 40 hits that people are playing out here, totally different to what I grew up on and was playing on in wedding bands back home. So I had to learn a lot of music that I wasn't that familiar with. So we, you know, the guys in the house bands at the Hollywood Jam started to let me jam. And over the weeks and months, you'd get these little gigs first. There's a local band. I played in like a bunch of rap bands. I was in Inglewood in a rap band for a couple of months. That was really fun. Wow. I was in a gospel band for a while. I was doing all these. At that time, I would do any gig. I'd just say, yes, I'll do it. And then I got a gig with a pop artist called Jordan Fisher through like Disney. Someone had seen me play, and that was in that realm, in the pop space, kind of a bigger one. And then I went back, I did a tour with him, and I went back to start doing the jam scene in LA again. And the drummer who played with Dee Snider, we played together. And then it was like, hey, Dee's looking for a bass player for a one-off show. I thought, perfect, because I'm in this other gig and that's rad. I kind of knew I knew who Dee was, but I didn't really know much about his entire back history. And as me and Dee always joke, we're like, we're supposed to do one gig, and then we ended up doing like 2 or 3 years touring.
So you show up and you crush it, and he's like, okay, I
He's
found
like,
my new
let's
bass
tour.
player.
Yeah, it was great. And I
Wow.
ended up becoming his MD as well. And we did like 2 or 3 years together. And I recorded some of the stuff on his second last record. So Dee was a bit, I guess, the first bigger rock and roll one. And then off the back of Dee, I'd already started filling in for a friend who played for Steven Adler, because he was like double booked sometimes. So I was playing with Steven from Guns N' Roses, and then Whitesnake.
We were joking like you have big hair, but probably not the biggest hair.
Well, when I first joined Whitesnake, and I know a lot of those guys long before I was in the band, like we knew each other. Because again, a lot, people are session players, and David had seen me play at some festivals where I was playing in bands before Whitesnake. So I guess it was in his head that when the position came open, he already had me in place. But when I first joined and we were doing like band shots, I was like, this is the first band. I don't have the biggest hair.
That's so funny. That's a crazy story. It happened pretty quickly, too. What do you make of that?
It happened quickly once it really started rolling, but it feels like
kind of once you're in, and it's a smaller community of people than
yeah,
maybe you might think.
It snowballs at a certain point, but like the first few years in LA were rough. Like it was really rough. It was like, I think I'm going to starve or not be able to fly home. Like at one stage, I remember I had a voucher for like a rice and bean burrito from Taco Bell. And that's like all I had left.
What kept you in it when it was that hard? I mean, there doesn't seem like there was a plan B. Like this was it. You had to make it work.
I think not having a plan B necessarily, but a lot of this, I think, comes back to the music and it being a platform or a vessel. There's something internal driving why I keep doing it, because there's a bigger purpose for it all. So I don't really have a choice to not keep going in a way. And then just pure stubbornness. And there's something about resistance, and there's just the audacity to think that you can do something. And if you have such an audacious goal, at some point I was like, well, fuck it, I'll be a session player. I don't really know what that is, but I'm going to go do it. And that if I can keep growing this platform, then I can keep speaking for what, my sort of path in life is all about. So it's a little bit of stubbornness and a little bit of audacity.
We're brought to you today by ROKA. Glasses are not something you normally think about as a piece of performance gear, which, when you think about it, is kind of insane because you can't perform at your best if you can't see. Well, the geniuses at ROKA basically rebuilt eyewear from the ground up. No matter how active you are or how much you sweat, these things never slip or fall off your face. They're super durable, they look awesome, and they've got tons of super classy modern styles to choose from. I've been rocking ROKAs for about 4 years at this point. I love them. I'm a big fan of the Hamilton style in gloss black. That's this frame right here, as well as clear, or I guess they call them vintage on the website. And if you want to try them out for yourself, you can do that right now and unlock 20% off your order with the code RICHROLL at ROKA.com. Or you can click the link in the description below. Okay, back to the show. Well, let's talk a little bit about how all of that works. Like, how are you using this platform? I know that, we have tons of overlap in our friend group and know lots of the same people. But one of the things that you've done that's really cool is this Highway to Health series that you did with Derek Green.
Yeah.
Who's, who I know through Toby Morse.
That's right, yeah.
And he's
Love those guys.
He's the guy in, how do you say it? His
Sepultura.
name is Sepultura. I
Sepultura.
never know how to say Sepultura.
Yeah.
Legend.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
So you did this series where you interviewed all these people and, talked about the impact of plant-based nutrition on health, et cetera. Like that's one of the things that you've done, but you've done a lot of things. And I want to talk about this documentary project that you're working on now.
All the things. Yeah. Derek is awesome. I love Toby and Derek and all that gang.
He's a lovely human.
Yeah. And again, it's one of those things like people see Derek perform and he's this big, scary metal guy, screamo, heavy metal. He's a total pussycat. But, we met years ago, music industry and same groups of friends and all that as well. And we were seeing all these similarities of our own frustrations with the misconception around how it must be hard to be healthy on the road. And Derek obviously is really representing in the male demographic, big, strong dude and vegan. And we were talking about, he was actually in Dublin with Kip and a few of like the advocacy world were recording for early iterations of a documentary. And I remember Derek was playing in Dublin and I was on a layover, and we were just sitting comparing this idea that we both had to do like a plant-based show of some form. And they were essentially the same thing. So I was like, why don't we join forces? Way more fun. So we just started filming. I put together a crew from Ireland and, you know, raised little funds, and, you know, yourself, you're like, it'll only cost a little bit. And then this big production happens. You're like, fuck, now we got to fundraise. This part sucks. But we went around the world, and COVID obviously kind of stopped us like it did with many people, but we had filmed quite a bit. And the idea was just to show how easy it is to actually be healthy, whole foods, plant-based anywhere in the world. Because if Derek and I can do it constantly on tour, not knowing where our next meal is coming from, and in this constant state of motion and dealing with, you know, ever-changing situations, we wanted to just show that it's actually very easy. So with, you know, who we're connected to naturally, our friends are, and musicians and whatnot, we just started doing these interviews, and we did a lot in Brazil because he's got a big base out of there. And we went on board with like Sea Shepherd, and we did ocean conservation. We talked to Ford about, you know, the future of automotives, and it's a fun little series. And we're just now starting to actually kind of push it out slowly, because like a lot of media projects, it's hard to find your footing and to get stuff out there. So we figured, you know, we'll record a bunch of it and just let it do its old school street team thing.
Well, was it originally intended to be something that you would set up with a streamer or a network?
We did film,
and then COVID kind of derailed that, and now it's like a YouTube thing? Yeah,
because we filmed with the intent of, let's do like season 1, and we'll do, you know, 8 episodes. But right as we finished filming what we considered like to be season 1, we had all these cool, fun interviews with Dee, we've Moby, we've, you know, Kevin Smith, the usuals, and then a load of random, like, just brilliant minds. The negotiations with the powers that be and a lot of these streamers and that, the contracts were just so ridiculous that for what, it's a mission aligned project. The whole point is to just put stuff out there that it might inspire some people to, you know, think differently. And it was weird. We just kept getting asked to sign into these things into perpetuity that they would own the content for 7 years and maybe. So we just pivoted at that point because no one in any of the arts really knew what was happening. Obviously, through COVID, it was difficult. So it's like, well, let's just kind of chop it up into smaller segments and start putting it out and see if it takes its own wings.
And are you going to continue to make new episodes?
Well, we've so much content from the original one. So first we'll put all of that out and then hopefully we'll film more down the line while we tour, because it makes most sense when we're on the road and if we can kind of overlap or sort of chase each other's tails on tour. Because I'm going on tour starting like 2 weeks. And I'll be out for 3 or 4 months, and Derek's out on their farewell cycle starting already. So it's kind of about catching where we are.
Yeah, I mean, where are you going to overlap? I guess, well, in the heavy metal world, like the big thing is all these European festivals, right? So all the bands are kind of in the same place at the same time and going from one festival to the next.
Well,
is that true?
That's what we all want. But what happens is, like, if you play Hellfest or Grass Pop or, you know, all the Sweden Rock, the typicals in that run, which are the most amazing festivals to play, usually you check the flyer and your friend's doing Friday, you're doing Saturday, your other friends are doing...
And they've left before you get there and all that.
Yeah, which is the only frustrating thing. Like, I was just talking to my friend this morning who plays with Steve Hackett, Genesis, and he's in Guadalajara when I land with Bruce, and we're playing the same venue but a day apart, and we're chasing for like 2 weeks. We're on the same route, so there's a lot of that with touring musicians. We're just like, oh, I almost saw you.
And how do you use your platform kind of in an analog way when you're up in front of all these people in real life all the time? Like, what does that look like for you as somebody who spends a lot of time considering or thinking about, like, you're this public person, you have this thing you care about, you want to carry this message?
Honestly, just trying to live by example. Like, for me, social media is a love-hate relationship. Like, for many people, that sometimes I just want to delete it all. But then I think, you know what? I love food and I love this travel that I do. I just post about how simple it is, because the curiosity then that people are messaging me all the time from all over the world. Food looks amazing. I had no idea you could eat that. I had no idea, where'd you find this restaurant? So for me, I just like to sort of show how easy it is. And also, in doing so, you're supporting a smaller economy and you're helping restaurants around the world or whatever. So a lot of it is food for me. And then I really like conversing with people who think extremely differently. So I like to kind of get involved while I'm traveling in sort of very, very different juxtaposed worlds. So my use of the platform in that sense is not always online. A lot is going on offline as well and behind the scenes and opening a lot of dialogue as I travel with unlikely, very, very unlikely people and very unlikely industries as well. So as far as the use of social media and the platform itself, like in a visual way, it's mostly just food and health and kind of breaking down that stereotype of rock and roll and
right.
You must be partying all the time. Like, I do shots of wheatgrass.
Yeah, I mean, you want to know it's really punk rock? Not partying and trying to get to bed on time and treating your body right.
Yeah. Well, hey, no judgment either. Yeah. I have friends that can party like actual rock stars and seem to be fine, but it's just...
God bless those people.
I know.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around how you do it, though. Like, you're playing these gigs, you don't finish until late. You have this rider, so there's food backstage, but still, then you're immediately on a bus or going to an airport. You're in airports. We all know what airport food is like. You arrive at your hotel. Room service is terrible. Maybe you're not near a city. There's no Happy Cow, friendly, vegan restaurant that's within walking distance. Like, how are you putting all those pieces together and keeping it healthy?
It's a combination, I guess, of... I've been doing it so long now. I feel like I've been on the road pretty consistently for like 10, 12 years, like without stopping between all the bands. So you get pretty smart about the small things, like bringing snacks and bringing, like, because you've had too many situations where you've arrived in wherever, Sarajevo, there's nothing open, and you at least have your dried mango and mixed nuts
with you.
You
have like one like suitcase just full of...
No, I'm not that extent, but I always have like in my backpack, I have some snacks for like the emergency brake seal if hungry, the famine spuds are in there. But really it's like eating sides has been a big thing that I always talk about. Like no matter where you are in the world, and steakhouses or anything like that are always gonna have sides. Like most places have vegetables, but when you're just used to ordering a certain way, because food is absolutely about psychology. For me, if the restaurant seems hard for a vegan to eat at, you just look at the sides and then you ask for all the sides as a dish, as a main. But being prepared then with some snacks as well. And when I'm home, especially, like I'm all about home cooking and sort of stocking up.
Well, you live out in the middle of nowhere in the desert, though, right?
I do.
It's not like there's a whole bunch of restaurants that you're going to be going to.
Which is probably good because it makes me cook. It makes me cook a lot. But you just get really used to it. It's like, this is my normal. So it's not, it's not something that I'm going to ever, just because there's only fast food around, I'm going to eat fast food now. Because I know I've done that before and it makes me feel totally crap. And then you try and perform on top of that. Like I used to joke with some of the guys I'd be on the buses with, and the hardest place actually to be consistently healthy is the US, because most of the bus stops, they're not necessarily the East and West Coast, but the bus stops in those little strip malls that have, the Wendy's, the McDonald's, the Burger King, whatever, and then everyone's going there. Now they have Chipotle's. Chipotle save us a lot.
That really is a lifesaver.
Yeah, I'm so
America,
sick of it though.
Wherever you go, like you can get rice and beans. I know.
And sofritas, you're like, oh yay! But at least there's that. But I used to do, because you can get veggie burgers, veggie vegan burgers, whatever. But I would still feel crap if I ate.
Yeah, because it's still fast food.
It's just fast food. And I just don't like how it makes me feel. So I'd rather go into the petrol station or the gas station, as you say here, and get an apple, a banana, a bag of popcorn and a bag of nuts and water and wait until I get to the hotel than just go and get the veggie supersized meal or whatever because it's convenient. So, because I know how it feels. You're already tired enough on tour, and then to put the wrong fuel in and to have to walk out and play, like especially in festival season, you're playing to 80, 100,000 people and you're like, you need to be fueled
Yeah.
correctly.
Yeah,
So
of
it's just
course.
something I don't compromise on, you know?
What is that like when you're walking out on stage and there's that many people in the crowd and they're going bananas?
It's a trip. It's a trip. And it's funny though, like the bigger the crowd, the easier it is. Because it's so surreal when you're playing to the sea of dots of everybody like jumping up and down. It's really, because of the bands that I've been playing with over the years, it's pretty special because you're playing legendary hits. You're playing stuff, you know, Dee Snider's doing I Want to Rock or We're Not Going to Take It, and everyone's like bouncing like they're teenagers again, and Whitesnake songs. So it's an adrenaline rush. It's, I would imagine, something similar to when you're deep in it with your ultramarathons. But it's also, for me, the only time that I'm really present, which is such an interesting thing when I step away and because I'm actually I appear extroverted, but I'm an introverted extrovert. So stage, like I don't like being in the crowd or having to be in a big crowd. So when I'm on stage, I feel safe and I'm very, very present because I can only be here locked in with my drummer. I'm in this moment as present as it gets. And this energy that's coming. And it's also really cool because you play all over the world and you look out into crowds of people who you're looking at, however many thousands of people probably have loads of stuff on a daily basis they debate and fight about. But music then has this beautiful unity where for that 90 minutes or 2 hours or 3 hours, everybody's just in it for music, which is really beautiful. And there's like this respect. And that's kind of what I vibe off the whole crowd for.
What has been the most surreal, like, live performance experience that you've had?
Ooh, there's been a few. Actually, probably more recently, we finished up the European Whitesnake run at Hellfest, which is one of my favorite festivals.
Hellfest?
It's amazing. We're playing it again with Bruce. I love this festival. And Steve Vai joined us for Still of the Night. So we had Steve Vai come out and play on Still of the Night. So we had the original Still, Whitesnake. And
Right.
to play with Steve Vai and have me there, Tommy Aldridge on drums and David Coverdale on vocals. I was like, what the fuck am I doing up here? This is such a trip. That was amazing. That was really, I'll never forget that because obviously Steve is a legend in his own right. And then to have David decide to bring him out for that song and nobody was expecting it. And, he's on the original recording. So that was pretty incredible. But I've had a few of those. Like I had some amazing experiences with Dee as well. We did some really fun stuff in South America. And yeah, it's...
Where are the best crowds for this kind of music? Is it South America? Is it Japan? Is it like Germany?
South America is pretty spectacular. Something about rock and roll really is still alive down there. And also when you're playing, and this can apply to anywhere really, Eastern, like we just played in Sarajevo recently. This is one of the most amazing experiences because I don't know if you ever heard Bruce's story with Sarajevo in the 90s.
No.
Oh, it's phenomenal. I'll let him tell it properly when you guys get together. But he was the only person that went in and played music during the war. And it's this whole beautiful, crazy story. But so Bruce is a legend in Sarajevo because as he'll say himself, that he was just young and stupid and didn't know what he was actually doing. But it was incredible. No one would go in. Even the UN were like, you're crazy. So Bruce went in and played a gig in the middle of the war. And he became a legend in Sarajevo. And he hadn't been back since. And we went back last year to do the concerto. And everyone was just crying in the crowd.
Wow.
It was phenomenal because guys that were now our crew and or in the crowd were kids at the gig when Bruce came in, when, these people had no hope in this crazy, crazy war that's going on. And he just went in and played music and they loved him so much for that. And then you're back there 20-something years later and he's just a god in Sarajevo. So the energy is like something I'll never be able to explain or experience. I've never seen so many people cry and like freak out because they hadn't seen him since. And then we did this show. And also we were doing this really beautiful, unique show with the concerto orchestra doing Deep Purple and some of his own songs and the songs that would have been songs he played in the 90s when he went in and played this tiny dive club. So crowd-wise, you have those special attachment type scenarios. And especially in like if you're in the Balkans or Eastern Europe, and places like South America where they've had a harder time coming out of heavier times like that, rock music was a big anchor for people. It's like the church of rock and roll. So the energy is pretty spectacular. And often if you're in countries that are poorer or lower income countries where it's a big deal to save up and go to a show. So they're going like full on. It's not like, oh, I'm going to a show this weekend. This is a big deal to go to these shows. So it's amazing for us as bands to have that energy. And yeah.
Who are like the people that you would love to play with? Like who are the icons? Like who are your influences?
It's funny. The influence question is always lost on me because of how, like, I didn't come to music because I was inspired by, I saw a bass player and did, you know what I mean? It's not the typical, but there's a couple of bands, like I always love like Radiohead, so unique. I absolutely love their music, like bands that are not necessarily in the heavy realm, but...
Have you met those guys? Have you met Radiohead?
No, my friend's actually recording with them this week and I need to... Again, they're one of those, like, you'll never see them anywhere.
No, I know.
And Colin Greenwood's one of my favorite bass players.
They live in like Oxford they probably all live in different places now. But.
Yeah, I think they do. But like bands like that, I just find, because they're so different musically. But there's some, if we're talking about like, who can you bring back as well? I'd love to play with Miles Davis. I'd love to, play with a lot of bands that aren't around anymore. I love Fleetwood Mac. I also love really heavy music like Gojira and Meshuggah and stuff like that. So there's not like one band that I can say, oh, that's my goal, because I wasn't planning any of this anyway. And I ended up in some pretty badass bands. And that's, if it all stopped tomorrow in music, I'm like, that was a good run. That was pretty good.
Also, not for nothing, there aren't that many women, are there, in this world, in this subculture, that are playing at the level that you're at? Like
more now,
are there?
But not a lot. No, we're definitely, and we're all friends. There's like 5 of us.
Are there other bass players?
Yeah, there's like 5 women bass players and we're all friends. And it's funny. So, no, there's more and more, but in different genres. But it's absolutely still in the minority, yeah. But hopefully that is changing over time. It's just by being out there and doing it, you're not normalizing it. You do see more and more young players coming up, young girls playing, and it's great, like killing it.
Yeah, it's democratized it in a way, right?
It's pretty wild though, seeing that level of musicianship from these like tiny kids on the internet. You're like, oh fuck, I gotta go home and practice.
How often do you practice? What is the routine to stay tight?
Well, coming up to a tour, I will lock myself in the room for a few weeks prior every day, like, because I'm usually learning a new set. So I've never heard any of Bruce's music before. So I have to go listen to it. So I have a ritual that I always do, which is I listen to the music for weeks prior, if I have the time. Now, this is very different if someone calls you and says, I need you tomorrow. But if I have the ideal situation, I'm listening in really good bass headphones for a couple weeks. I'm out and about, I'm listening, because it has to be like in you. The music has to be internalized. So then by the time, because I do everything by ear, so by the time I go to sit and learn it, I'll notice if there's mistakes.
So you're not reading sheet music.
No. I did over the years a little bit for certain gigs, but it just hasn't really been needed so much. I haven't been offered, and then I just used my ear for absolutely everything, Riverdance or whatever it is.
Riverdance. Is Riverdance still touring?
Riverdance is still around. It's about to start. Oh God, I don't know. How many years?
How long has this been going on? Like 30 years?
I should know this, but it's definitely the guts of 30 years. It's just, and it does its residency all the time, and it's opening again in the theatre in Dublin, which is wild. It's huge.
Speaking of Dublin, do you go back to Ireland much?
As often as I can. Like on this tour, so after we do South America, and then we start in England, there's about 5 days in between. So I'm going to pop home, see my granny, because she's 96, and pop home and see her, see the family, spend a few days at home, and then bounce off to. So ideally in between tour runs, I can go and do a little stop off in Europe.
You're not going to make a pit stop in Greystones and jump into the Irish Sea with the
Every
lads?
time I go, the lads are like, come on. I'm like, oh God.
Steve and Dave.
Maybe. You've done it, right?
I have. Yeah, it's been a while.
I should. I always go out to them.
We're talking about Steve and Dave Flynn, the happy pair of guys who've been on the show before.
Yeah.
They've really changed Ireland's relationship with food, like almost single-handedly.
Big time.
They're so influential there.
Yeah, I thought it would never happen in Ireland. It felt
What is it like now?
I think it's grown exponentially thanks to the lads, is a lot of thanks to the lads, but it's also a small country, so it's easier to see change when you're talking about such a small country. It's much harder to see this in the US when you're talking about 330 million people versus 5 million people. It's really exciting that I go home now and all the petrol stations have, even the shitty fast food, everything has a vegan option. But it's a hot topic as well, because we're farming country, and I mean there's a whole other rabbit hole to go down, but it's a big problem that the farmers aren't getting the support that they should be, and so it creates this divide between the plant-based vegan movement and it shouldn't, because there should be a unity in the middle of it all.
Because it's perceived as an attack on the agrarian culture or the farmers themselves and their lifestyle. Yeah.
Which is absolutely not what the intention is, or it should be. It should be a total unity happening there. But, the way that the mainstream media and governments are often set up is to keep us divided on these issues. So,
are there subsidies in Ireland like there are here that are underwriting some of the animal agriculture?
Yeah, I think they're not on the scale of here, but they absolutely exist. And it's, here is out of control. And until we get private lobbying and subsidies out of food and politics, I don't think we're going to have any chance. It really is the stone that's keeping us weighted down, which sucks. We should be able to see change faster in a place like Ireland. But at the same time, what's really interesting, because I've been away for so many years, when I go home, I'm starting to see this performative political thing happening in Ireland now that's kind of mimicking what's happening over here. I didn't grow up under this umbrella of feeling that we had a left and a right. I hate the labels. I hate this sides game that politics plays, but we are getting those extreme lefts and extreme rights in Ireland now, which is really weird because it's happening at the same time we're also seeing a lot of positive change. But, it's funny because Ireland's amazing. I love being Irish. I love the banter. I miss the crack, all that. And when I say crack, I mean fun, not the drug. But we also have, a crazy, corrupt political system like everywhere else. But we're small, and the world sees us as all fun and shits and giggles. But we have a lot of positive things happening in the past few years. My generation really stood up against the whole church and this institutionalized vibe that we grew up under and trying to get away from. But the two things are happening at once, and it's kind of frustrating because you think, oh my God, it's the food, the change, you see it there, but then the pressure on the farmers is creating also this big fight, this infighting that's happening. I hope that it just doesn't end up making it erupt.
Well, you gotta figure out a way to pave a path forward for the farmers that is economically viable for them and respectful of how they the tradition and the culture. Can you transition away from the way you're doing things to use that land for something better and to make that an attractive on-ramp for them where they can take care of their families and make a living and all of that. And until you unravel that knot and figure it out, you're asking of course they're going to be defensive and interpret it as an assault on who they are or their identity.
100%.
And that's not a recipe for change.
No, it's absolutely not. And putting each side pressuring each other is just ridiculous. It's two sides of the same coin. We all really want the same outcome as humans. But I get really excited about things like cellular agriculture, and if we could scale that up, and if that's what farmers could transition to, or, rewilding, obviously all this good stuff. But it has to be, like you said, it has to be incentivized, it has to monetize. It doesn't make economic sense to just ask a farmer to cull his herd down.
Of course not.
It's ridiculous, especially generational farmers. It's absolutely unfair. But the way that the media sets it up, that we're always in these two different echo chambers fighting with each other and not getting to this. It's actually the system that's skewed. It's not the sides probably agree on more than we're here fighting about one thing and we've 99 other things in common. So
I like what you said earlier about putting yourself in a position to have conversations with people that see the world very differently from you, and you have that opportunity because you're meeting so many people and traveling all over the world, and because you're so well traveled, you have an appreciation for different cultures and different perspectives. And I really think that if we want to solve our problems, you have to figure out how to have a respectful, compassionate conversation with somebody who sees the world very differently than you. And right now, my sense is that has really broken down, and it's a lot of people shouting at each other.
Yeah. And I don't know why, I mean, I guess I do know why we do it, but I find it very exciting to talk to someone who is going to trigger a new thought for me. Who was it that said, I don't like that man, Lincoln. I don't like that man very much, so I must get to know him.
Yeah,
I love that.
He did say that.
I think it was Abraham
Somebody
Lincoln, was it?
said that.
Some.
So how do you practice that?
Well, I guess it all started because touring and traveling. I started to see, especially in the US, like from an outsider point of view, and I love the US. Obviously, it's given me so many amazing opportunities, and I love living here. But I started to hear so much of this negative talk about each other, the sides, which team are you on? And I never liked it. And I'm a neutral outside source, and I consider myself politically stray until someone proves that they can actually commit to completing a promise. But out of sheer curiosity, when I'm touring and I'm talking to people every day that are awesome, amazing people, like really sweet, reminds me of home, the Midwest, the South. And then I'm coming back to New York or LA, and I have friends who are bitching about people from these states. I'm like, that's so unfair. Have you ever even been there? Have you had a conversation with someone? And also you see, because if I turn on the TV in wherever, Arkansas or Mississippi or Texas, I'm immediately seeing a different rhetoric happening and almost different news. Right? And then you're in LA or San Francisco or New York, and you turn on the TV, and so you start to become very aware that there's a reason that people are having these very divisive debates and conversations. But then you're out and about and you're going to your gigs, and your fans and people around are just amazing people. They're all lovely, and they're all just going about their day-to-day lives, and they have difference of opinions, but everybody is I believe people are inherently kind, and I believe that the system is what's keeping us divided. I'm constantly stopping people when they say mean shit like that about each other. You know, COVID just escalated it so badly, and that's the reason that I left LA for a while. I was like, I can't. Suddenly people who were great friends and loved each other last week are like, I'm never talking to that person again because they have a different opinion, whatever it was about, masks or vaccines or politics or whatever. And they just forgot that they were friends. And it just really escalated it. So I had to sort of separate myself from a lot of people in the city and just step outside, because I'm okay with people having different opinions and being at a table with people who have very different opinions, actually, because I think it's really interesting.
You have to be around people with different opinions, if for no other reason than to stress test your own ideas.
Practice patience with each other.
Yeah, the idea that you're going to immunize yourself against people who have a different sense of the world creates a fragility. Like, don't you want to be robust and resilient, not just in your body and in your mind, but in your, the way that you interact with people, and exposing yourself to people who have, very different ideas, and learning how to get along with them is something we should be embracing and seeking out, not avoiding and trying to isolate ourselves from.
I think that's where all the growth is, actually. I think, that's what we forget. It's in those conversations that both parties are gonna, and I don't mean political parties, but both. It's so funny now. You have to be so careful with your use of language.
Careful, Tanya.
I was laughing about this the other day because someone asked me.
I'm gonna get you in trouble here.
Oh, I'm gonna be cancelled by everyone. It's just fine. Someone said UK to me about Ireland. Are you from the UK? And I said, I'm from the Republic of Ireland. I'm an Irish Republican. As in, I'm from the geographical Republic of Ireland.
It is a republic,
yes.
yes.
Yes, it's a republic. And then they thought that I was a Republican. I was like, I didn't say either of those. It just got lost in this very defensive. It all
went off the rails.
It was pretty funny. I was like, okay, here we go. I don't know. I think that all change comes from these conversations. And I mean, your platform's amazing for that, because you're bringing on so many people from different walks of life and different thought trains, where a lot of the time, even in our own movement, in the animal rights and vegan movement, which I get frustrated with all the time, and that's why I kind of stay on the outskirts. There's a lot of amazing people doing amazing things, but there's also a lot of ego leading it the wrong path and going down these echo chambers that are just detrimental to the cause overall. And I know and I understand a lot of it comes from passion, but if you let anything be led with ego, you're just going to totally fuck it up.
Yeah, I mean, that's true in every aspect of life, right?
Everything.
I think you need change makers, change agents, activists and revolutionaries and catalysts of all kinds. And some people are hardwired to be a frontline, sign-carrying activist
Absolutely.
who's shouting. And
I was.
Yeah, you were. I'm really not wired for that.
Yeah.
I try to, carry the messages that are important to me in a gentler way and in a different way. But I think it's about having a diversity of voices and opinions, but also within a community of people that feel strongly about a subject matter or a certain thing that they would like to see change or evolve in the world, that you need a diversity of voices within those communities. And then that community has to deploy its energy outward rather than focusing on themselves and, the preaching to the choir thing. Like at some point, it's just, I'm not interested in spending my time talking to the people who are already on my page about a certain issue. Like, I don't know what it helps like the community kind of cohere and congeal and creates a sense of, belonging to something, I suppose. But ultimately it becomes, it doesn't serve anything other than to strengthen one's sense of allegiance to a tribe and affirm their identity, but it's not actually moving the needle in terms of any kind of real change.
No. And that's because a lot of the game-changing conversations can be considered a bit boring as well if it's not that kind of full-on activism. There's all these spaces that are so exciting for like innovations in materials and food, and I don't know why we're not. Because not everyone's going to come at this from ethics when we're talking about just like, the movements we're in.
And nobody wants to be condescended to or moralized.
Exactly.
So you have to create a way forward that is attractive to somebody.
Mm-hmm. And economically and, to these industries and to, it has to work in the world as well for it to really be embedded and to get like to get to like a critical mass or a social tipping point with all of this. You need all, like you just said, you need all the parts. Like there's room for everyone at the table, but we have to, when you get, and I'm just using the vegan movement as an example because we're in it, but when you get, for instance, like the clean meat, cellular agriculture, which I think is amazing, and I think it's a game changer, everybody wins, but you also have activists trying to take it down because one cell originally came from an animal.
Right. Purity.
The purity is
at the cost of actually changing something in a real way.
And that can be really detrimental and dangerous for a movement to move forward. So it's like accepting it's progress. It's not perfection, right? You're just trying to move the needle towards a social tipping point to make this a kinder world in whatever way we can, because we all have blood in our hands. We have iPhones. We exist in a world where it's almost impossible to have a little bit of blood in your hands. But if we know and we can choose to make these decisions daily when it comes to our food and how we exist in that space, and we know, okay, well, that's how the markets work. If you send a market signal as a consumer, if I'm buying this, it's going to send a signal that there's more demand for that. And the industries will change, because I don't think that these industries, it's not that they're nefarious and waking up every morning like,
twirling their mustaches.
Yeah,
and
right.
We're gonna pull one over on the people.
They exist because we fund them.
They're responding to market forces.
100% and or subsidies. So like both have to change, but that takes individual action, which people think is too hard, but individual action seems hard, but then collectively it is collective action and sending as a consumer like those. That's why I'm so passionate about this space, because it's so easy to decide daily everything you buy is a vote with your wallet. And we all work hard to earn our money. And why would we spend it on this, keeping this in existence? But, we're still looking away a lot. We're really good at looking away and morally compartmentalizing these things. So if we can just sort of step back and look and go, okay, even if, like, I'm always encouraging people to just be plant-based a few days a week, one day a week, try it a meal a day, like give it a go. And then, if people get into it, great. But this going extreme purist on things in any movement you're just scaring people a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm. So you're in the Deep South, you're on tour, maybe you're in Arkansas or Mississippi or rural Louisiana or something like that, and you come upon somebody and you find yourself in a conversation, and suddenly this person seems curious and receptive to, they're like, wow, this Tanya, like I've never seen anyone like Tanya before. Like, what is she, what is this person all about? And then there's an opening where they're like, how do I make that lifestyle change? Like, what do you say to that person who suddenly seems receptive to doing something different?
Usually something like, you're already vegan because you're vegan, but you also eat meat and cheese. So I look
What
at
does
it.
that mean?
I look at these things in reverse, because I always find it really funny when people say that it's hard or it's, extreme, because everybody eats pasta, pizza, potatoes, broccoli, fruits, veggies. I mean, if you're going to tell me you don't eat any of those things, good base to start with. So I'm like, you're already vegan. You also eat meat and dairy. So it's about kind of breaking down that, what people might think is complicated around food. But also, like I said earlier, just saying, if someone's asking about, for instance, how do I eat out? Order the sides instead, or try to add more veggies to every meal. But I'm not a big fan of the labels of the diet. So I try to keep the buzzwords out a lot, because for some reason they're a big trigger if you're saying like vegan or vegetarian. I mean, I'm not sure why, because it's literally about being kind to animals. I don't know why it got tagged with like the tagline of it being extreme choice.
It was all that blood you were throwing all over people back in the day, Tanya. It's your fault.
It's my fault. I'm very sorry. At least I got it out of my system young. I'm sorry.
But what about the why, when somebody's like, well, explain to me like why I should care about this or why I should do this? Like, obviously it's working for you. You seem really healthy and energetic, and you have this amazing career, and you seem happy. And you care about this. Like, why should I care about this?
Yeah, well, it's sometimes you're gauging, like if a person's trying to come at something from a health perspective, if they have a very obvious health issue, of course you can go with we know, like the science is stunningly clear that there's a serious benefit for heart disease, diabetes, hypertension, all the obvious things. But if it's not a health thing, then maybe it's animals. Maybe it's, well, do you really love animals? Have you ever looked into what, mass animal agriculture actually looks like and what factory farming looks like? Because, people are like, oh, I get grass-fed. Like, it's funny that everybody's saying they get grass-fed when it's very small, very, very minimal percentage that actually is. So I guess you're trying to gauge what the person is curious about. Is it their own health, or is it maybe they love animals? But the cool thing about the whole plant-based umbrella, it's about the closest thing to a panacea we have, because you look at ocean acidification, rainforest deforestation, antibiotic resistance, zoonotic diseases. Like, there's no real negative to shifting towards this, because for your own health, obviously the health of the planet, and then all these ripple effects that it has out. Surely one of these things speaks to you. Do you have children? Like, this is what we're doing to the planet, and their generation is going to be affected by this. The planet's going to be fine. I hate when you get the sort of performative activism of save the planet. Of course, we all want to save the planet, but the planet's going to be fine. But whether or not we want to exist here on a healthy planet while we're here, and your kids and their kids. So, I often talk to older families who have 2 and 3 generations that, like, they're starting to shift toward plant-based because they saw, oh wow, the soil, like, places I was talking to a farmer and his family in Kansas a couple of years ago, and he was telling me the story of how it was when his granddad was on the land, and how different it was by the time he had to work under the contracts for big agri, and they're tied into using these specific fertilizers and pesticides. The soils changed, the food changed, the financial system structure changed for his family. And then he's like, I don't want to pass this down to my son and their kids. So they were starting to kind of think about shifting, but a lot of, the information is being kept away. So I really like getting into, it just depends on where the person is coming from. If someone's asking you from a health perspective, I'm like, go listen to Rich Roll and Simon Hill. Yeah. Or read these books. But that's the really cool thing about this whole sort of movement per se. There's a positive no matter what way you're looking at it. There's really no negatives that we've yet to find.
It is interesting that what's good for the microcosm is good for the macrocosm. What's good for, the body is also in the interest of the planet and future generations. It's not about perfection. Of course, choices that we make are going to, create downstream consequences as a result of being something that has to consume in order to live. But can you make the kinder, gentler choice? And as it turns out, actually serves your own physical health. And it's taking a positive vote for the planet as well in the future generations. So I love the way you characterize that. It like checks all these boxes at once, but in terms of how you carry the message or speak to people, trying to figure out what their values are and what they care about, I think is where you find the opening.
It's important because we can't all just attack each other because I believe this and you believe that, so you must be wrong, or they think you must be wrong. We're never going to get anywhere if that's
well. Wait till you see
think.
the comments on this video on YouTube underneath of people shouting about.
Oh yeah. I'm sure.
That or the
I'm
other.
sure. At a certain point, you get a seriously thick skin. You're like,
I came here to hear about Tanya, the bassist and heavy metal, and I got a dollop of the vegan world. I didn't ask for that.
I will say I wish the word didn't have to exist because I wish none of us needed labels, and I wish it was just normal to try to live as kindly as possible as we're here. I feel like the labeling of each other is. So I'm with you on the vegan comments in the vegan comment section. That's a whole other tangent on keyboard warriors and this thing that we do of like, if would this person say it to your face? And that's why conversation is so and really having conversations with people that think completely different.
And music is the great unifier that transcends all of that and brings people together. Do you know Maggie Baird?
Of course, Maggie's awesome.
So I was thinking like, could you enlist like support and feed on the tour in the way that she does for Billy when Billy's touring?
I would love to. I must actually ask Maggie about that. I haven't talked to her in a little while. We did one of her live. It's really fun cooking with her on Instagram when the signal's not working properly. I'd love to do something like that. And actually, Bruce had said, I don't know if we'll be able to implement much on this first round because we're kind of testing the waters, but he's very interested in like environmental ways to like what can we do that's less impactful. Like when we're in certain countries, we can take trains instead of because traveling is obviously nowhere near the impact of food impact. But I'd love to enlist and start to. That's a big passion for me, is connecting the right people, like connecting people who think.
You got to talk to Maggie.
Yeah, it'd be
like
amazing.
Right away.
Yeah. That'd be really, really cool. But I think, I don't know if they're doing it in the state, just doing it in the stadiums with just Billy at the moment, or if I think they were doing something with Coldplay as well, actually. I'm not sure. I must ask her, but it's so interesting. But I would love to, that's the thing, you're always trying to gauge, like it's one thing for me to bring in the backstage to be mostly plant-based, or I'm bringing the bands out.
Right, but how do you take that out of the backstage and into the experience of the people that are attending the show?
That's the cool thing though, the one when I dabble with the whole I just delete social media because I kind of hate it thing. But when you have fans from all these bands you work with over the years that follow you for music, usually, and then they actually start to see about the food or the projects that you're doing and the work with the nonprofits or whatever. That's really cool because that's a way of showing, because people get interested in what do you do day to day when you're not on stage. So it's kind of a good way of using your platform, just living your life honestly on social media, which is these days, not the way you're going to monetize anyway.
No. You got to keep that stuff at arm's length.
Yeah, I'm constantly being asked to do like brand shout outs and that, and I can't do anything because when I do a lot of due diligence on anything I get involved in, and it's so funny.
Nothing lives up to your standards.
Well, I'm hardly going to.
I think a lot of people would want to know about the beauty routine.
There's not really one. I'm very lazy. I'm pretty lazy.
Yeah.
I don't even know what that looks like because I just like water and moisturizer are what I answer to that question all the time.
That's so funny.
Not enough sleep, too much coffee, and veggies. But we don't have that same culture in Ireland. I didn't grow up under like an obsessive sort of aesthetic beauty like regimen for women. It was, I grew up very just playing out in the dirt, and I guess I kind of became a bit more of a stage persona in what I do, but I try to avoid the obsession of all of that and just stay healthy. And I really believe that, like when people ask me, what do you do? What's your like when they frame it in the beauty regime thing, I'm like, I think it's internal. It's what you eat. it's staying hydrated. Like I drink a lot of herbal tea, I drink a lot of water, and I eat clean, whole foods, plant-based, vast majority of the time. So I think that maybe helps keep me put together somewhat.
Maybe. There might be a connection there.
Maybe, I don't know, because I tell you what, if I didn't eat this way and practice this way of living, I think I would have fallen apart on the road by now, because I've seen it so many times with crew, especially crew, like older crew have been on the road forever and they all have diabetes or they have hypertension and they're eating fast food and drinking, fizzy drinks all day. And it's very hard to live like that.
Yeah.
And I would hate to feel that crap on the road, because it's hard enough to be on the go every day for 3 or 4 months at a time.
It's amazing how many bands that were huge in the 80s and 90s now are having this success touring, and ththese guys are in their 70s.
I know.
And it's forcing them to be healthy.
Yeah.
Because there's so much money at stake too. Like it's sort of like, do you want to keep doing this? All right. Well, you're going to have to let go of that notion that you have about what rock and roll is in order to do it.
It's pretty funny. You get like Tommy Aldridge, Whitesnake drummer. Tommy's in his 70s. He's amazing, but he's been cycling every day since he was in his teens. So you've got the guys that always were healthy, and then you've got the ones who went hardcore rock and roll and had to do a 180 to get out of it
and redo it.
Yeah. And so now backstage looks very different.
Who's the healthiest person in heavy metal?
Me.
Good for you.
No, I don't know. There's a lot. The thing is, and I always
do you know this band Parkway Drive?
Know of them, but I don't know them.
Yeah. So Ben Gordon is the drummer. I know him. They're an Australian band from Byron Bay, and
cool.
Ben is like a major wellness warrior, meditator.
Oh, wow.
Eats super clean. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot. The thing that always surprises people, it's funny because metal and heavy rock can quite often be associated with this like satanic, like what are they doing? Like not so much these days, but people would have always thought, they must be just eating cheeseburgers and drinking whiskey and whatever. But actually the roots of a lot, like punk and all that is literally about fuck the system.
Yeah.
Like that's where it comes from. And so whatever the status quo that you're
but
fighting
punk
against.
has that like straight edge.
Yeah, true. It has
thing,
that also that.
And the kind of vegan macrobiotic sort of affiliation that came from Bad Brains and
of
the
course,
like. But heavy metal doesn't really have that same
A lot of metalers, though, it's always like there's a lot of metal bands that are vegan. Like they're all I don't know what, I guess it is this subculture of like questioning the system, and it's surprising. Like even the likes of Derek and Doyle and all these guys that are absolutely 100% like vegan and in this heavy metal world. It's confusing to the brain for some people. It's funny because it doesn't seem to fit together. You think they're going to chew the head off a bat or some crazy shit, but just broccoli mostly.
Yeah. I want to ask you about Bob. Who is this guy Bob that you're making a movie about? Can you talk about that?
A little bit. Oh, Bob's going to be either kill me or love that he got a shout out. Bob is my neighbor, and he is now family, basically. I'll say a little bit about it because it's very much in its infancy stage. It's a documentary I'm going to be working on with veterans, and we're shooting some like trailer now and fundraising for it because it's a massive issue that's come across my radar one too many times to ignore, where I've had a lot of veterans in my life over the years in crew, and I had 2 partners over the years that had really chronic PTSD, and I had this situation happen with my neighbor Bob where he had a lot of loss happen almost 2 years ago now, 1.5 2 years ago. And at the same time, I was going through a lot, and I just moved into this small town, and we became very close very quickly over a lot of life trauma that happened in a short space of time. And when I saw the lack of resources yet again for a veteran to not only with mental health, but just support in general, I started to wonder if, like, other than, feeding him, which was really funny because Bob calls me a vegan and he thinks it's witchcraft. He's a 75-year-old Vietnam veteran, and he's a wonderful character, amazing man. He started to get a bit more curious about the food side of it and how that could maybe help him feel better. Obviously, physically is one thing. So I wanted to maybe just get a group of his friends who typically just, it's kind of, I guess, an old-fashioned thing. They just eat a certain way or their wives cook for them. And Bob lost his wife and his son in one day. And he also had this trauma from before. He's a Vietnam veteran, so obviously that comes with its own battles. But I wanted to see, it was never supposed to escalate to what's happening now. If we could just go shopping and like teach some guys who haven't sort of been self-sufficient or healthy before, and then I went, well, let's start documenting it. It might be fun. I asked him if he'd want to, and he was keen and curious. So we just started messing around with this idea of, well, maybe do a documentary. And then I started talking to a couple of people in our space about, it's like, oh, okay, that could be really fun. And I thought, you know what, it's one thing to do a media project, and Bob being a catalyst of a story of many, many veterans who have the same frustration, where there's not a lot of resources for, you come back from one war and then you're fighting this whole other war for yourself, which is, you know, none of us can even comprehend that level of having to deal with all this. We know with the plant-based food movement that a lot of these diseases, they shouldn't be having to battle on top of everything else. So the idea initially is to get a group of veterans and do, you know, sort of a, I don't want to call it a transformation, but like a health transformation per se, to see if we can help with these foodborne diseases. But also, in the background, I think it's important to have really, really strong science to back it up. So I want to do a study as well. So we do a larger scale study. So I've been going around, like I was talking to Professor Gardner last week in Stanford. I was up. I spoke to him last week about it. It's just very, very early phases of like what's the best way to approach this, that it's not just a media project, and it's not about, you know, that kind of Hollywood side of doing a movie about a thing, that this is really hopefully going to impact in the long run and have a massive like ripple out effect into the VA system. And because there is actually a lot of incredible food clinics, sort of the infrastructure's in place, these lifestyle clinics, but they're not really bubbling yet because there's not enough eyes on it and there's not enough people leaning into that side. So you've got a lot of people fighting to make this work in this space. But I just have come across this story way too many times with veterans, and I wanted to again figure out like, how can I use my connections, my platform, and bring together some storytelling, which we know storytelling is very powerful. And when everything happened with Bob, and you know, he became an inspiration for me too as well. About, I talk about being tough. Like, these guys are tough anyway. But so I'm basically in the very, very early phases of putting this into a media project, and also hopefully a mass study, so that we can walk away with, you know, bulletproof data that will hopefully save the lives of a lot of veterans in controlling these diseases, that there's just no need for people to be battling things like diabetes and obesity and hypertension these days. Like, when we know we have the solution here, but also with a massive focus on mental health. And with that, I want to lean into the gut health, because obviously gut health and brain health are intrinsically tied. So having experts from all these fields come on board to really look into this, because obviously we're not saying that if you eat this way, you're going to cure PTSD. That's ridiculous. But you're certainly going to feel better. And that's a step towards healing in a more profound way, and bringing in experts in mindfulness, in neurology and everything to try to help this hugely underserved demographic in the US and worldwide. But it's like, when you start to look into the numbers here, it's absolutely terrifying.
That's quite beautiful. What a worthy investment of your time and your energy. You have this guy, Bob, who can be this protagonist and put a face on a much larger problem, which is the many ways in which veterans are suffering and falling through the cracks and not getting the resources and the help that they need. And they're just one subset of a larger, more chronic issue, or more broader issue around chronic health concerns, mental health and physical health. And the idea that you would tend to care for these veterans in that way, like, I think is something everyone wants to see, and it's a problem everyone would want to see solved. And it's complicated, because how do you help somebody take care of themselves better in a physical way if they have PTSD or these mental health things that are real barriers to self-care and other aspects of your life? Like, you have to untangle all of those knots in order to solve the problems.
Yeah, it is a bit of a behemoth, and you're like, it's sad. Like, it's interesting, because I come from a totally unmilitary, we have a military neutral military presence, but I don't have this background in it. But because I just jumped in so heavy into the US and it's so intense here, the whole military presence, and you know, everyone's family almost has a veteran in it, and you're just seeing it more
and you're out
more.
in the desert by 29 Palms. There's got to be a lot of veterans.
So I was there
and like biker dudes.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because I literally live by the biggest military base in the world in 29 Palms. I was in there for the first time the other day because I'm starting to just like put the feelers out and talk to people about who might be interested in being involved, because the same frustrations, but it's really funny because, you know, people are set in their ways anyway. Like get young military guys as well that are just like super regimented about things, but that can be very positive if it's for a healthy, you know, if they're taking those habits and applying it to a healthy approach. But it's amazing to me to go into somewhere that spends so much money on like precision training and like creating these machines of disciplined men, and then you go to the chow hall and they're being fed absolute shit.
Yeah. I mean, that's across the board. I went to the
Schools
Olympic Training Center.
I'm
I
sure.
know, hopefully it's different now, but the food that they were serving there, I couldn't believe it. To, you know, the most elite athletes.
Yeah. And it's the same in schools. Like this doesn't just apply to, you know, you see a lot of the school system. It's cool now you're seeing it roll out in the hospitals in New York that they're changing to default plant-based, but prisons, everything, like this is something I'd love to dive into across a lot of different, it's not just military. Like I hate that it's the same in the prison system. It's awful. Like, you know, of course we get these recidivism rates because there's just no real education being pumped in or real good food or training. It's a mess. The whole thing's a bit of a mess. It's like, how can we like try to have a bit of a positive domino effect over here? So with the military as well, knowing like with Bob and all these friends over, because a lot of crew find in the music industry come from are ex-military. They find themselves in the music industry because it's the closest thing to what they're used to deployment. You're in motion still, right? So you get a lot of crew. And so I keep seeing this pattern, and it's just so sad that when they do reach out for help, like some cases, some states have great clinics and great resources, but a lot it's just overwhelmed and underfunded. And a lot of the guys will get frustrated that obviously it's beautiful to hear and be told thank you for your service most places you go, but the action then after the statement is not happening in a lot of cases, and they have enough to be dealing with. So if we can use unlikely connections and use storytelling and try to catalyze something positive for this demographic, because when you start, like the numbers in the US are crazy with how many, it's like in the 70 percentile of families have a veteran in their direct family or 1 degree of separation. And that's, you know, affecting them and their families. And then a lot of the community as well as bikers and stuff, which is really great because I love the biker community because it's got this camaraderie about it already. And these guys who, you know, fought together and were away together deployed, there's this intense community and brotherhood. So a lot of the support and infrastructure for a project like this is already there amongst themselves, which is exciting to see. And it's just like, how can we bring in experts in their field? So there's a lot of great doctors lined up for it, which I'm excited about and honored that they've said yes. And, you know, the doctors are excited because we haven't really tapped into this space before, and professors and specialists in all walks of life to see if we can actually do something that is not just a story, but that after the fact, after the movie or whatever is made, that it continues to ripple out and actually change a system to help these veterans long term.
That's so cool. Yeah, I saw Alan Desmond and Gemma Newman in your deck.
Yeah, I love them.
As doctors.
Yeah, and Columbus, Batiste, and we've actually a couple of great people coming on board. Garth Davis and
Garth too, right?
Yeah, and
so you're just raising funds, right? You're like doing you're trying
in the
to raise
fun
a budget
time,
for that?
the fundraising part of it, which when, you know, I start all these projects, I'm like, oh, I fucking hate this part. Everybody hates fundraising, but it's part of it, you know, and I think it's a worthy cause. So my usual stress is that I get these massive ideas right before I go on tour. So I have to try to get as much work done on the foundations of the project and then go on tour for a few months and then come back and hit it in the pockets when I'm off tour, because I have to keep present in the music industry. Like I would go down a rabbit hole and just work on this all day long and work on anything that's like impact project related. But I do have to honor my career in the music industry and stay present enough to have the platform and obviously tour. So just trying to find that balance of being on tour enough to stay, you know, relevant in my industry and have that platform. And obviously I love touring, but then as soon as I'm off the road, and well, I'm working on it all the time while I'm on the road as well. So, but I'm just in that phase now of, getting the sort of the roots together and the fundraising and all that fun stuff.
It's cool. You're somebody who shows up. I think that's a big piece in your success or your trajectory. Like, you know how to show up.
Thank you. I think that's the only way we should.
You know, as an activist, as a musician, like, you know, to come to America and figure it out and like make your way and like build this thing. I think showing up is a big part of it.
You have to. I mean, how else are you going to get anything done, right? It's scary. It's scary at times. And sometimes I question my own decisions to take on behemoth projects like such, but I mean, that's what we're here for, right? It's just trying to pay it forward in some shape or form. If, of course, I could just tour and come home and do nothing, but I feel like I would not be happy inside if I wasn't paying it forward in some shape or form and giving back, because that's kind of the whole point of being human, right?
I think I want to end this with some thoughts about achieving a dream. Like, you came here with a dream, like a lot of people, and you made it happen. You're making it happen. Like, you're manifesting these projects and these ideas into the world. So if somebody's listening to this and, you know, they have a dream, but they're confused about how to begin or where to start, like, what is the message that you share with young people or other people who are like, how do I do what you do, or their version of what you do?
Following what excites you, for sure, is something to check in with yourself on, because if everything you're doing, if there's no like excitement in it, it's not pushing you a bit. So I've always kind of think, like sit down and think what excites you, because there's a lot of buzz around this like internet generation now of finding your purpose, and you don't always just know that. I've known that since I was a little girl. I'm lucky that I sort of see my path like that. So that's somewhat easier when you already know, but just a way to try and figure that out is sort of sitting with yourself and go, what really excites me? What lights me up? Like, when I think about a project that might help all these people, it's like, that really fucking excites me. And that could be, even if I fail at it, I'll give it a shot, you know? And then just like we were saying earlier, just the audacity to try and do something that seems ridiculous and outside of comprehension at the time, because I never would have guessed that this is what I would end up doing. Not in a million years.
What did you think you would be doing?
I thought I'd be a marine biologist or a vet. But when I realized
there's still time if you
there's
want to do that.
Still time. I might do that, you know, after this next tour. I'll study. Or, you know, I want to study philosophy. I love philosophy and all that. So, but that's the thing. It's also like not freaking out about, you can have all these chapters in life. So, and it's absolutely okay to fail. So with music, because it's really difficult in the music industry, I get people all the time asking like, should I move to LA? Should I do that? It's hard for me to answer that with a straight yes or no, because it's really hard. And I kind of caught the last wave of the Sunset Strip having the jam nights, and that is kind of gone now, and this whole pay to play. So I can't say, yeah, you're going to come out and you're going to make it, but you should come out and see if you can cut your teeth at it, because it's pretty hard industry. So there's the just try, and then is that actually, speaking of philosophy, it was Goethe, the German philosopher, said, whatever you can do or believe you can do, begin it. Boldness has greatness, magic and power in it. Just begin it. And I love that, because it's, what's the worst that can happen? I always thought that with like going up to a musician to ask about a jam night, or going out to try and fundraise for a project, whatever it is, it's like, I'm just going to try. I'm just going to ask these people to see if they want to be involved or if I can do this, because if they say no, my ego will take a bit of a hit, but I'll get over it, you know?
And no regrets. It's that reflex to
no
action.
regrets, Rich. You know, the classic tattoo. No regrets. If you're
Do you
gonna
have
get
that tattoo?
Oh, I've been tempted to get it so many times. I'd love a no regrets tattoo.
I think that can be arranged. Just talk to Toby.
There you go.
He'll hook you up.
Yeah.
Well, this was great. Thank you. You're an inspiration. I love getting to know you a little bit better.
Thank you.
You're a powerful presence in the world, and the way that you show up in your art and in your advocacy is really laudable. So I appreciate you coming and sharing your path.
That means a lot coming from you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for having me.
If people want to learn more about you, or perhaps they want to maybe throw you a few bucks for the documentary or get involved, or what, if somebody's listening to this who is in that world and wants to connect with you, like where can you send these people?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really only active on social media wise. I'm on Instagram, so it's just at Tanya O'Callaghan _official. I'm there, but I'll be setting up some stuff over the coming months regarding the project, but you can reach me through my website. So on my own website, which is just my name, TanyaO'Callaghan.com, you can email through there. And yeah, when we really start ramping up on this project, I'll definitely be setting up some type of hopefully fundraiser or internally trying to raise funds through the philanthropic movement. So
nice.
Anyone's interested in helping with veterans, there's definitely a project coming up that needs it.
Yeah. Cool. How many cities are you hitting with Bruce?
We're doing 40 something shows. So yeah, we got about 40.
All North America?
No, South America first. So we're starting we go down, we start in Mexico and then head through Brazil. And then after that I think we're doing 9 or 10 cities in Brazil. Brazil is huge. I was just there doing another tour and a speaking thing. It's so funny. Like no matter how many times you go, it's so big. But yeah, we do South America first. And then we go England, up and down England, and then we go across Europe and we land in Greece.
So you are doing all the festivals in Europe over the summer.
Yeah. So we're already all these text chains of like musician friends. Are you going to be there on the Friday or the Sunday or the Saturday? We're chasing each other's tails through,
Right on. We'll have fun.
Thank you.
And go out and make that movie and then come back and talk to me about it.
I would be honored.
All right. Thanks, Tanya.
Thank you.
Peace. Plants. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. I truly hope you enjoyed the conversation. To learn more about today's guest, including links and resources related to everything discussed today, visit the episode page at richroll.com, where you can find the entire podcast archive, as well as podcast merch, my books, Finding Ultra, Voicing Change in the Plant Power Way, as well as the Plant Power Meal Planner at meals.richroll.com. If you'd like to support the podcast, the easiest and most impactful thing you can do is to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and on YouTube, and leave a review and or comment. Supporting the sponsors who support the show is also important and appreciated, and sharing the show or your favorite episode with friends or on social media is, of course, awesome and very helpful. And finally, for podcast updates, special offers on books, the meal planner, and other subjects, please subscribe to our newsletter, which you can find on the footer of any page at richroll.com. Today's show was produced and engineered by Jason Camiolo, with additional audio engineering by Cale Curtis. The video edition of the podcast was created by Blake Curtis, with assistance by our creative director, Dan Drake. Portraits by Davey Greenberg, graphic and social media assets courtesy of Daniel Solis. Thank you, Georgia Whaley, for copywriting and website management. And of course, our theme music was created by Tyler Pyatt, Trapper Pyatt, and Harry Mathis. Appreciate the love the support. See you back here soon. Peace. Plants. Namaste.